I never thought it would end this way. My hands were still shaking as I fumbled with my keys, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The car ride home had been a blur, a desperate rush through traffic, every red light stretching my agony, every passing second another opportunity for Daniel to do something irreversible. I had to explain. I had to make him understand. But as soon as I pushed open the front door, dread sank into my bones. The house was empty. Not the kind of empty where someone steps out for air. This was different. The silence was thick, the kind that feels permanent. My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed from room to room. The living room looked untouched, but the photos, our wedding picture, the framed vacation memories from last summer, were gone. The hallway leading to our bedroom felt longer than usual, as though time itself was stretching the distance between me and what I feared I would find. And when I stepped inside, my worst fears were confirmed. His closet was cleaned out. Every drawer, once filled with his neatly folded shirts, sat open and barren. The nightstand, where he kept his watch and the book he was always reading before bed, was bare except for a single slip of paper. I reached for it with trembling fingers, my eyes already burning with unshed tears. "You won't find me. Don't even try." The words were like a punch to the gut. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the reality crashing down around me. Daniel was gone. Not just angry. Not just cooling off somewhere before returning home to fight. He had left. Vanished. And if the stripped-down house was any indication, he had been planning it. Had he known all along? A fresh wave of panic surged through me as my mind scrambled for answers. No, it didn't make sense. This morning had been normal. I had kissed him goodbye like I always did, made some offhand comment about a client at work, and left, oblivious to the fact that my world was about to implode. Had he suspected? Had there been signs I missed? I thought back to today, to the moment everything came crashing down. James' office had always felt like a second home. The large glass windows, the scent of leather and expensive cologne, the quiet hum of the city below. It was our secret haven, the place where my two lives blurred together. I had told myself it wasn't real. That it was just an escape from the routine of marriage, from the steady comfort of Daniel's love. But today shattered everything. The door had flown open so suddenly that I barely had time to react. 1 second, I was wrapped in James' embrace, his lips grazing my neck as he whispered something about a weekend trip. The next, my husband was standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. Daniel hadn't said a word. He hadn't shouted, accused, or demanded an explanation. He had just looked at me. And then, he walked away. I hadn't chased after him. I had been too frozen in place, my mind racing to catch up. By the time I came to my senses, he was gone. I scrambled to gather my things, barely registering James' voice behind me. Something about damage control. About how we could talk through this. I didn't even answer him. All I could think about was getting home. Getting to Daniel before he did something drastic. Before he packed a bag, booked a hotel, or, God forbid, called a lawyer. But I was too late. I sat in the silence of our half-empty bedroom, staring at the note, at the ghost of my husband's presence. Where did he go? I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, my pulse hammering in my ears. It rang twice before going straight to voicemail. "Daniel, please call me. I'm so sorry. I can explain, I just come home. Please." I ended the call with a choked breath, gripping my phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Then I tried again. And again. Nothing. I checked our shared bank account, my fingers moving frantically over the screen. He hadn't touched the money, not yet. But that didn't mean anything. Daniel wasn't impulsive. He was smart, methodical. If he wanted to disappear, he would. And he had. I turned toward his nightstand, desperate for any clue, any sign that he hadn't just erased himself from my life entirely. There was nothing. No scribbled note. No clue about where he might have gone. Just that single, devastating message. "You won't find me. Don't even try." Tears burned my eyes as I realized something even more terrifying. I had no idea what Daniel was capable of when he was truly hurt. And I had just given him every reason to hate me. I sat there, gripping the note in my trembling hands, reading the words over and over until they blurred. You won't find me. Don't even try. Daniel had vanished. Not just stormed out in anger. Not just gone to a bar to drink his sorrows away. He had erased himself from our home, from our life, like he had been waiting for this moment. How long had he known? The thought made my stomach churn. Had he suspected for weeks? Months? Was he lying next to me at night, already planning his escape, while I slept soundly in the false security of his love? I shot up from the bed, my panic giving way to a desperate need to act. Sitting here wouldn't bring him back. I needed to find him. I needed to explain. I grabbed my phone and tried his number again. Voicemail. Again. I clenched my jaw and dialed another number, one I hadn't called in a long time. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Hey, stranger. Michelle. I breathed. Have you seen Daniel? There was a pause, then her voice turned wary. No. Why? I hesitated. Michelle was Daniel's younger sister, and she had always been fiercely protective of him. We got along well enough, but I knew if she sensed something was wrong, her loyalty would always be with him. I swallowed hard. We had a fight. I lied. I came home and he's gone. His things are gone. I don't know where he is. Another pause. Gone? She repeated, her tone shifting. Like left for a drive or left? Left, I whispered. Michelle sighed. I haven't heard from him. But if he's really gone, Iris, maybe you should give him space. No. My voice cracked. I can't. I need to talk to him. There was a long silence on the other end, and then Michelle said something that made my blood turn to ice. What did you do? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She knew. Or maybe she didn't know, but she could hear it in my voice. In the raw desperation clinging to my words. I just need to find him, I said instead. If he calls you, please tell him to come home. Michelle didn't answer right away. I'll let you know if I hear anything, she said finally. Then the line went dead. I exhaled shakily and tossed my phone onto the bed. Think, Iris. Think. Where would Daniel go? I rushed to the closet and scanned the empty space where his clothes had been. He had taken his essentials, shirts, jeans, his leather jacket. His suitcase was gone too, which meant he wasn't just crashing at a hotel for the night. I hurried to the bathroom. His toothbrush was missing. His razor. His cologne. Panic swelled in my chest. This wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment decision. He had planned this. My legs felt weak as I sank against the bathroom sink, gripping the edges to keep myself upright. And then, a horrifying thought struck me. What if he had planned this for longer than I realized? I had been careful. So careful. But maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been careful enough. I grabbed my phone again and scrolled through my recent texts. There, at the top, was James' name. My stomach twisted. Was that how Daniel found out? A message left open on my screen? A call I didn't erase? Or had he known all along? Had he been waiting for me to admit it, to come home and confess, and when I didn't, when I came home and lied with my silence, he left? I shut my eyes, the weight of my actions suffocating me. Then, a notification flashed across my screen. A text. My breath caught as I opened it. But it wasn't from Daniel. James. Is everything okay? You ran out so fast. My pulse pounded in my ears. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could tell him I was fine. I could tell him I needed help. I could tell him to leave me alone. Instead, I deleted the message and tossed my phone onto the bed. James didn't matter. Nothing mattered except finding my husband before he disappeared for good. I wiped my damp palms on my jeans, forcing myself to think clearly. Daniel wouldn't have gone far. Not yet. He was methodical, but he wasn't emotionless. His heart was probably raging, his mind clouded. That meant he was still somewhere close. There were only a few places he would go. His best friend, Mark? No. Daniel was too private to confide in him right away. His office? Maybe, but it was late. His parents' old cabin? A lump formed in my throat. That was the only place that made sense. Daniel had inherited the small lake cabin from his parents years ago, but we had barely visited since we got married. He always told me it was his quiet place, the one place he went when he needed to clear his head. If he really wanted to disappear, that's where he would go. I grabbed my purse and keys, my heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't going to lose him. Not like this. The drive to the cabin was a blur of headlights and regret. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, the rhythmic hum of the tires doing little to calm the storm inside me. Every worst-case scenario clawed at my mind. What if he wasn't there? What if he was, but he refused to see me? What if he did something reckless? I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. No. Daniel wasn't like that. He was logical, controlled. He wouldn't do something drastic. But then again, I had never seen him look at me the way he had today. The memory of that moment slammed into me again, the way he had stood there in James' office, silent and still, like a man witnessing the last few seconds before a fatal crash. His eyes, usually so warm, were empty. I had shattered something in him. Something that maybe couldn't be repaired. I forced my foot harder on the gas. The roads leading to the cabin were winding and unlit, the trees looming like silent judges in the dark. It had been years since I last came here with Daniel. We had spent a few long weekends here early in our marriage, but as time went on, I had pulled away from those trips. I told myself I didn't like the isolation, but the truth was, I didn't like how it forced us to be alone together. How it forced me to face the man who loved me unconditionally, while I let my own feelings drift. I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat. As I neared the cabin, my headlights caught the silhouette of a car parked outside. My heart leapt. Daniel's car. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. His car meant he was here. But it didn't mean he would let me in. I pulled up beside his vehicle and cut the engine, the sudden silence pressing against my ears. The porch light was off, the cabin windows dark. But that didn't mean he was asleep. Taking a shaky breath, I stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin. The night was eerily quiet, save for the rustling of the trees and the soft creak of the wooden steps as I climbed them. I hesitated at the door. What was I supposed to say? What words could undo what I had done? I raised my hand and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Daniel? My voice barely carried in the vast emptiness around me. Still nothing. Panic clawed at my throat. He had to be inside. I wasn't leaving without seeing him. Without explaining. Without something. I tried the doorknob. It turned. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath me. The cabin smelled like pine wood and old memories. The air was cool, untouched. My eyes adjusted to the darkness as I scanned the space. And then I saw it. The suitcase. His suitcase. Sitting near the couch, unopened. But Daniel wasn't here. A cold wave of dread crashed over me. I turned in frantic circles, searching for signs of him. The kitchen was empty. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, but one quick glance told me the bed was undisturbed. He had come here, but he hadn't stayed. Where the hell was he? My breath came faster, my chest tightening. I grabbed my phone with shaky fingers and dialed his number. Voicemail. Again. Daniel, please, I whispered into the receiver. I came to the cabin. I need to see you. Please call me. I ended the call and let out a shaky breath. Then, something caught my eye. On the small wooden table near the window, a single sheet of paper lay under the dim glow of the moonlight. I stepped closer, my pulse thudding in my ears. It was another note. I knew you'd come here. But I won't be where you expect me to be. Not anymore. I clutched the note, my vision blurring. He had been here. He had waited for me to come, just to tell me I was too late. A choked sob escaped my lips. He was running. And I had no idea how to catch him. I stood frozen, gripping the note in my trembling hands. I knew you'd come here. But I won't be where you expect me to be. Not anymore. Daniel had been here. He had written this and left before I arrived. He was running from me. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I had known he was hurt. Of course he was hurt. I had betrayed him. But I had told myself he just needed time to cool down, that if I found him, I could explain. Maybe even fix this. But this note, it told me something else. Daniel wasn't just leaving me. He was making sure I couldn't find him. My knees felt weak as I sank into one of the old wooden chairs by the table. I tried calling him again, but it went straight to voicemail. I gritted my teeth and texted instead. I know I hurt you. But please, just talk to me. Let me see you. Let me fix this. I stared at the message, half hoping it would show. Read. But it remained stubbornly delivered untouched. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to think. Daniel wasn't an impulsive person. If he was going to disappear, he had a plan. But I knew him. I knew his habits, his way of thinking. If he wasn't staying here, where would he go? I scanned the room again, looking for anything, some hint, some clue. His suitcase was still there, unopened, like he had dropped it on instinct but never intended to stay long. That meant he had left in a hurry. Then my eyes landed on the fireplace. The faintest glimmer of silver caught my attention. I stepped closer, my breath hitching as I crouched down. Sitting on the stone hearth, neatly placed as if he had left it for me to find, was his wedding ring. My stomach dropped. Daniel never took it off. Not when he worked out, not even when he showered. He had once told me that wearing it made him feel grounded, like no matter how crazy life got, there was one thing that never changed. And now it was here. Abandoned. I reached for it with shaking fingers, the metal cool against my palm. A fresh wave of nausea hit me as I clenched my fist around it. This was more than a goodbye. This was him cutting ties. A sob built in my throat, but I forced it down. I didn't have time to break down. Not yet. I grabbed my phone again and dialed Michelle's number. She picked up on the third ring. Iris? Her voice was groggy, like I had woken her up. I barely registered the time. Michelle, have you heard from him? My voice was raw, desperate. A pause. No. I told you I'd call if I did. I gritted my teeth. He was at the cabin, but he's gone now. He left me a note. And his ring. Silence. Then Michelle sighed. Jesus. Michelle, please. If you know anything. I don't, she interrupted. But if he left his ring, Iris, that's serious. He's not just mad. He's done. The words sliced through me, but I refused to accept them. I need to find him, I whispered. Michelle hesitated. Iris, maybe you should. But I didn't let her finish. He's my husband. My voice cracked. I know I messed up, but I don't get to just let him disappear without trying. Another pause. Then a sigh. If he's really trying to stay hidden, he won't go anywhere obvious. Not Mark's place, not any hotel in town. I swallowed hard. Where then? A moment of silence. Then Michelle spoke, her voice softer now. There's one place he used to go before he met you, she said. When he needed space, before he had a home to go back to. My heart pounded. Where? She hesitated. There's a small lake house about 2 hours from here. It belonged to our uncle before he passed. Daniel used to go there to clear his head. I don't even know if he still has the keys, but if he's really running, that's the kind of place he'd go. My pulse raced. A lead. It wasn't much, but it was something. Send me the address, I said. Michelle sighed again. Iris, I don't know if you should. Please. My voice cracked. I have to try. A pause. Then, finally, fine. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a message. An address. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed Daniel's ring, shoved it into my pocket, and ran out the door. The drive to the lake house felt longer than 2 hours. Every mile stretched like a lifetime, the silence in my car broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the occasional buzz of my phone, none of which were from Daniel. I had texted him 3 more times, each message more desperate than the last. Daniel, please. Just tell me where you are. I know I hurt you, but don't shut me out. I love you. Please let me fix this. Nothing. The cold metal of his wedding ring pressed against my palm as I gripped it tightly, my other hand white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Every time I glanced at it, I felt like I was staring at a gravestone. I wanted to believe Michelle was wrong. That Daniel hadn't left me for good. That he was just lost in his own pain, needing space before he could come back to me. But that note. That ring. I swallowed hard and forced myself to focus on the road. The lake house came into view just as the last traces of daylight faded. It was smaller than I remembered, an old, wooden structure nestled between towering pine trees, the dark water of the lake stretching endlessly behind it. A single light was on inside. My breath caught. He was here. I pulled up beside his car and killed the engine, sitting in the driver's seat for a moment, trying to slow my racing pulse. I could just barely see movement behind the curtain. He was awake. I had found him. I exhaled shakily and stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting at my skin. The ground crunched beneath my boots as I walked up to the porch, my heart hammering. I hesitated for only a second before knocking. No answer. I knocked again, a little harder this time. Daniel, it's me. Silence. I pressed my forehead against the wooden door. Please, just open the door. I know you don't want to see me, but I need to see you. Still nothing. Desperation clawed at my chest. Daniel, please. I choked out. I'm not leaving. A long pause. Then, finally, I heard footsteps. The door creaked open an inch, just enough for me to see him. Daniel stood there, his expression unreadable. His hair was slightly messy, his eyes dark and hollow. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then he spoke, his voice low and cold. Go home, Iris. My stomach twisted. I can't. Daniel exhaled sharply and shook his head. There's nothing left to talk about. Yes, there is. My voice trembled. I need to explain. I saw everything. His words were sharp, cutting. I don't need an explanation. Tears burned behind my eyes. I made a mistake, Daniel. A horrible, stupid mistake. But it didn't mean anything. He let out a bitter laugh. Didn't mean anything? His jaw clenched. I walked into that office and saw my wife in another man's arms. And it didn't mean anything? I reached for him instinctively, but he took a step back, his expression hardening. The rejection stung worse than a slap. You were my everything, Iris, he said quietly, his voice filled with something worse than anger. And you threw me away like I was nothing. I broke. That's not true, I whispered. I love you, Daniel. Something flickered in his eyes for a split second. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. You don't get to say that. His voice was barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. Please, Daniel. I know I don't deserve it, but give me a chance to fix this. His grip on the door tightened. You can't fix this. My breath hitched. So what? I whispered. You just disappear? You leave and never come back? Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he looked me in the eyes and said the words I had been dreading since the moment I walked into that empty house. I already left, Iris. He shut the door. And this time, I knew, he wasn't going to open it again. I stood frozen on the porch, staring at the door that had just slammed in my face. Daniel was on the other side. I could still hear his footsteps retreating, the floor creaking under his weight. He was right there. But he was done. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock again, hesitating only for a moment before rapping my knuckles against the wood. "Daniel," I whispered. "Please don't do this." Silence. I knocked harder this time, ignoring the burning in my throat. "You can't just disappear," I choked out. "You can't just walk away from everything we built." A sound came from the other side. A rustling, like fabric moving against wood. He was still standing there, listening. That gave me hope. I pressed my palm flat against the door, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve to ask for anything from you. But please, Daniel, just open the door. Let me see you." Nothing. Desperation clawed at my chest. "I love you." A bitter laugh rang out from inside. And then, his voice. "You love me?" His tone was hollow, disbelieving. "Is that what you told him too?" I flinched like I had been struck. "Daniel, I..." The door swung open so suddenly that I stumbled back. He was standing there, his face cold, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, God, his eyes. They were filled with something dark and broken, something that twisted the knife already lodged deep in my heart. "You love me?" he repeated, his voice eerily calm. "That's why you were in his arms. That's why you let him touch you." Tears welled in my eyes. "I made a mistake." Daniel exhaled sharply and looked away, his jaw tightening. "You made a mistake." He repeated my words like they were poison in his mouth. "Is that what it was, Iris? Just a little mistake?" I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. "I never meant to hurt you." He let out a sharp breath and shook his head. "But you did." His voice cracked, just slightly. "You destroyed me." A single tear slipped down my cheek. "I just want a chance to fix this." Daniel met my gaze, and for a split second, I thought I saw something there, something soft, something that wanted to hold on. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "You can't fix this," he said quietly. The words shattered something inside me. My breath hitched. "So that's it?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "You're just going to walk away?" Daniel's expression hardened. "You walked away first." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "I didn't." His jaw clenched. "Yes, you did, Iris. The moment you let him touch you. The moment you chose him." "I didn't choose him," I pleaded. "I was lost, I was stupid, His voice dropped to a whisper. "You weren't lost, Iris. You knew exactly where you were. And it wasn't with me." My vision blurred. He turned away, gripping the edge of the door. "Go home." I let out a shuddering breath. "Daniel, please." He hesitated. Just for a second. Then click. The door shut. And this time, I knew. He wasn't coming back. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. The night air bit at my skin, the silence of the lake stretching out around me like an abyss. The cabin's wooden porch creaked softly under my weight, but the door in front of me remained shut. Sealed. Daniel was inside. I was out here. And nothing was going to change that. The finality of it settled over me like a suffocating weight. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't fighting. There were no ultimatums, no accusations anymore. Just silence. That was what terrified me the most. When a man stops fighting, it means he's already decided you're not worth the effort. Tears burned my eyes, but I forced myself to move. One step back. Then another. My legs felt weak, unsteady, but I managed to make it off the porch, down the steps, and to my car. I glanced at his car one last time. He wasn't leaving this time. He had already left. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My body was trembling, but I wasn't cold. The shaking was coming from the inside, deep, relentless, the kind of tremor that comes when you realize you've lost something you'll never get back. For the first time, I wondered if maybe Daniel had been planning this for longer than I realized. Not the leaving. but the letting go. Because the way he looked at me tonight, the way his voice didn't even break when he shut that door, told me one undeniable truth. I had been losing him long before today. I just never noticed. The house that wasn't home. The drive back home was a blur. By the time I pulled into our driveway, exhaustion had settled into my bones, pressing down on me like dead weight. The house loomed in front of me, dark and empty. For 10 years, this house had been my home. But as I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, I realized something chilling. Without Daniel, it wasn't home at all. It was just a building. The silence was unbearable. Every sound I made, my keys dropping onto the counter, my coat sliding off my shoulders, my own uneven breathing, echoed through the space like a ghost. I wandered through the house on autopilot, my fingers trailing over furniture, over walls, over memories that now felt like they belonged to another life. The wedding photo that used to sit on the mantel was gone. His favorite coffee mug, the one he used every morning, was missing from the dish rack. His books were no longer on the shelf. I hadn't noticed these things when I ran home in a panic, desperate to find him. But now, with nowhere to run, I saw it all. Daniel hadn't just left me. He had erased himself from this place. The bed felt too big when I finally collapsed onto it. I lay there in the dark, clutching his wedding ring in my hand, pressing it against my chest like it could somehow bring him back. But it didn't. And for the first time since he walked out of that office, I let myself cry out. I woke up to an empty house. For a split second, in the haze between sleep and consciousness, I forgot. I reached across the bed, expecting to find warmth, the steady rise and fall of Daniel's breath, the familiar weight of his arm pulling me closer. But all I found was cold sheets. Then it hit me. The silence. The absence. The truth. Daniel was gone. I sat up slowly, my body aching in ways that had nothing to do with sleep. My mind was sluggish, clouded, as if grief itself had seeped into my bloodstream. I forced myself out of bed, feet touching the wooden floor. The house felt unnatural, like I had stepped into a version of my life where everything looked the same but felt wrong. The kitchen was too quiet. The smell of coffee didn't linger in the air. The sound of Daniel flipping through the newspaper, sipping from his favorite mug, gone. I opened the fridge out of habit, staring blankly at its contents. A carton of eggs. Leftover pasta. A half-finished bottle of wine. Everything was where I had left it, and yet nothing felt familiar. Because Daniel wasn't here to make breakfast. He wasn't here to tease me about how much creamer I drowned my coffee in. He wasn't here to kiss me on the forehead before heading off to work, like he had done every morning for the last 10 years. And he wasn't coming back. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. My hands moved on their own, reaching for my phone, scrolling through my messages. Every unanswered text to Daniel stared back at me, suffocating in their silence. I know I don't deserve a response, but please, just tell me if you're okay. Daniel, I don't know what to do. Please talk to me. I love you. I will always love you. Delivered. But never read. I sucked in a sharp breath, my fingers tightening around my phone. Maybe Michelle had heard from him. Maybe she knew where he had gone after leaving the lake house. I hesitated before calling. But when she picked up on the third ring, I knew immediately, just by the way she sighed, that she had nothing to tell me. Iris, she said, her voice flat. I swallowed hard. Did he? No, she interrupted. He hasn't called me. He hasn't told me where he is. And I'm not going to ask him. I flinched. Michelle, please. You just what? She snapped. Want to hear him say he forgives you? Want to fix this overnight? My throat tightened. You don't get it, do you? She continued, her voice laced with anger. Daniel's not playing some game of hide and seek, Iris. He's gone. He's done. Tears welled in my eyes. You don't understand. No, you don't understand, she shot back. You broke him. And now he's doing what he should have done a long time ago, walking away. A sharp sob built in my chest, but I forced it down. Please, I whispered. If he calls you, if you hear anything, just tell me. A long pause. Then she sighed. I won't lie to him, Iris. The line went dead. I let out a shaky breath, lowering the phone from my ear. The weight of Michelle's words pressed down on me, heavier than anything I had felt before. Daniel wasn't just leaving for a night. He was leaving me. And no amount of texts, calls, or desperate pleading was going to change that. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, moving through the house like a ghost. Every room felt hollow. Every second without Daniel stretched endlessly. I sat on the couch, clutching his wedding ring in my palm, rubbing my thumb over the smooth band like it could somehow bring him back. Then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a knock echoed through the silence. I froze. For a moment I let myself hope. I leapt to my feet, my heart slamming against my ribs as I rushed to the door. My fingers fumbled on the handle as I yanked it open. But it wasn't Daniel. It was James. And the moment I saw the look in his eyes, I knew this wasn't just a visit. Something was wrong. James stood on my doorstep, his hands in the pockets of his expensive coat, his expression unreadable. The sight of him sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me. Of all the people who could have shown up tonight, Daniel, Michelle, even a damn delivery driver, he was the last one I wanted to see. I gripped the edge of the doorframe, my knuckles white. What are you doing here? My voice came out hoarse, exhausted. James tilted his head slightly, studying me. I could ask you the same thing. I frowned. What? His lips pressed into a thin line. I just came from work, Iris. You know, the place where you haven't been in 2 days? My stomach twisted. I hadn't even thought about work. Hadn't thought about anything except Daniel and the empty space he had left behind. I'm not in the mood for this, James. He sighed, stepping closer. I know, he said, his voice quieter now. I just wanted to check on you. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Check on me? I repeated bitterly. Are you kidding me? James had the nerve to look hurt. Iris, I care about you. No. I cut him off, shaking my head. You don't. You never did. If you did, you wouldn't have let this happen. His jaw tightened. Let this happen? Iris, you weren't exactly resisting. Don't. I snapped. Do not stand here and try to act like we were both in the same position. You knew I was married. You knew Daniel loved me. And you didn't care. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Look, I'm not here to fight. I heard what happened, and I wanted to make sure you're okay. I scoffed. Oh, you heard what happened? He hesitated, then nodded. Some people at the office were talking. Apparently, Daniel came in the day he found out. He didn't say much, but his voice trailed off. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel had gone to my office? What did he do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James hesitated again. Nothing, really. Just stood there for a while. Looked around like he was trying to process it. Then he left. I felt sick. I pictured Daniel standing in that office, the same office where I had betrayed him. Imagined him looking at my desk, my chair, the place where James had kissed me for the first time. I squeezed my eyes shut. Iris, James said gently. Come inside. Let's talk. My eyes snapped open, rage flaring in my chest. Are you out of your mind? I hissed. You think I want you in my house? The house I shared with my husband? The house that he left because of you? James flinched. Good. I stepped forward, lowering my voice. Listen to me very carefully. You and I? We were a mistake. The worst mistake I've ever made. James' eyes darkened, but I didn't care. I wasn't finished. I lost my husband because of you. Because of us. And I will never, never, make that mistake again. For a long moment, James said nothing. Then, his expression shifted, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. You know, he murmured, for someone who says she doesn't care, you sound awfully emotional. I sucked in a sharp breath. You think he's coming back, don't you? James continued, his tone almost amused. You think if you beg hard enough, he'll forgive you? I clenched my jaw. He won't, James said, taking another step forward. Because you did choose me, Iris. Whether you want to admit it or not. Something inside me snapped. Before I even realized what I was doing, my hand shot out and struck him across the face. The sound echoed through the night. James' head snapped to the side, his jaw tightening as his cheek reddened. Slowly, he turned back to face me, his expression unreadable. I pointed toward the street, my chest heaving. Leave. James exhaled through his nose, rolling his jaw like he was trying to shake off the sting. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I didn't move. Not until I heard the sound of his car starting. Not until his headlights disappeared down the street. Then, I stepped back inside, locked the door, and sank to the floor, pressing my forehead against my knees. I had never felt more alone in my life. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours. The silence of the house pressed in on me, suffocating, wrapping around my chest like iron chains. My heart pounded, my hands still trembling from the slap I had given James. But it wasn't just anger that had made me lash out. It was grief. Because no matter how much I hated him, no matter how much I wanted to erase him from my life, he wasn't the one who left me. Daniel was. And I had no one to blame but myself. I forced myself to stand, gripping the edge of the couch for balance. My body ached from exhaustion, my head throbbed, my eyes burned. But I wasn't done. Daniel was out there somewhere. Maybe he wasn't answering me, maybe he had shut me out completely, but I had to try one last time. One last message? I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed. Daniel, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve another chance. But if there's even the smallest part of you that still loves me, please, just let me see you. One last time. If you don't answer, I won't reach out again. But I need to say goodbye. I hit send. Then I stared at the screen, willing the message to change from delivered to read. It never did. The next morning, I woke up to an email. Not a text. Not a call. An email. From Daniel. My hands shook as I clicked on it, my heart slamming against my ribs. The message was short. Barely a paragraph. Iris. I read your message. There's nothing left to say. I wish I could give you what you're asking for, but I can't. Seeing you won't change anything. I won't come back, and you need to accept that. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine. Don't look for me again. Daniel. I felt the ground drop out from under me. This was it. The final goodbye. There would be no closure, no dramatic last-minute reunion, no chance to explain or plead or fight. Daniel had already fought. And he had decided I wasn't worth it. I let out a choked breath, gripping the edge of the desk as my vision blurred. My body trembled, but there was no one left to hold me. No one left to tell me it was going to be okay. Because it wasn't. Daniel was gone. And now, I had to live with the fact that I was the reason why. Weeks passed. Then months. I never heard from Daniel again. At first, I looked for signs. I checked our bank accounts, half hoping for a transaction that would tell me where he had gone. I scrolled through old texts, rereading messages from the days when he loved me. When I was still his. But as time went on, I had to face the truth. Daniel didn't exist in my world anymore. He had moved on. And I was still trapped in the wreckage of what I had done. I lost my job a few months later. Too many missed days. Too many whispered conversations in the office about what had happened. James tried to reach out once more, but I blocked his number. He was nothing to me now. I sold the house 6 months after Daniel left. I couldn't live there anymore, not in the place where I had destroyed my marriage, where I had watched my husband walk away and done nothing to stop him. And now? Now I just exist. I don't know where Daniel is. I don't know if he found happiness again, if he met someone who deserved him more than I did. I like to think he did. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When you break something truly beyond repair, you don't get to pick up the pieces. You just have to live with the emptiness that's left behind.